Yes, thank you, Shelley. So our next speaker, we're gonna roll right through these. We have Katie Paulson, McKenzie County Tax Director and Recorder. She's going to talk about calculating new growth value, when, who, new growth, and final values for budgets. Let's give Katie a round of applause.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I'm Katie Paulson. I've been the tax director in McKenzie County since 2014. I was kind of the last person that said, fine, I'll do this presentation. I was really hoping somebody else that has a lot more experience could have been up here, but here I am. First of all, Shelley touched on it, but our job as assessors is to fairly assess, apply a value to every parcel in our county that is locally assessed, residential, commercial, agricultural. Tricky job. We have a lot of things that go into it. And a big part of the process is the equalization process. So, like Shelley said, our assessment date is February 1st. What does that mean? It means that we are looking at properties as they are as of February 1st of the tax year. So if you're partially under construction, we take that into consideration. If you're using it as ag, and then partway through the year you change it to commercial, we always are looking at that date. So that assessment date is important. It's important for when new construction goes on the tax rolls. It's important when properties change classification from one type of property to another. So that applies to like annexations, which I'll talk about in the new growth. So the assessment date, February 1st, and then we go through the cycle of putting the value on the system, noticing our property owners. Next year it's changing. Every parcel will get a notice of value from the county that talks about when the local equalization meetings are. Like Shelley said, the local townships and cities have their equalization process, their local hearings in April. So generally, we have values inputted for anybody that's having a hearing in April by the middle of March so that we can send notices. Prior, it was notices if your value changed by 10% and $3,000. But again, that's changing. Everybody's going to get a notice, so we're going to have to make sure that we have those values in the system at least 15 days prior to the equalization meetings. The towns and the townships hold their meetings at different times during April, and then we wait and we do the county equalization within the first 10 days of June. This day is important because this is when we have our first real estimate of what our valuation is and what our new growth is, because we would have entered all of those in time to notice our property owners. So June would be the first potential time you could start to get some local assessment numbers from us. Again, you know from Shelley that the central assessments don't come in July. The tricky part is sometimes there are things that can affect our estimates of values as approved by the County Board of Equalization. A couple of those things are, one of the rules that we have as tax directors is that we need to be within 90 to 100% of market value or the value assigned by NDSU for agricultural land value. That's what we call tolerance. So our first job is to make sure that our market value or our agricultural value has that 90 or above to what our market value is. We figure out that market value by the sales ratio, which tax directors, city assessors do annually. We do it every year. We're working on that in the winter so that we can set the values in March and move forward. So when I talk about tolerance, that's part of our job. When we're looking at our tolerance, we're looking at the valuations of existing properties and how they measure up to our sales ratio and our median ratio, which we look at in each class of property. We have to equalize agricultural land separately, we have to equalize residential land separately, and we have to equalize commercial land separately. So there's a lot of moving parts. So that's the first piece of it. Hopefully, when we are presenting our numbers to our boards, we are in tolerance. Sometimes we are not. So sometimes if you are not at that 90-degree threshold and you haven't made a decision to put yourself at that 90-degree threshold, you're waiting for advice and ruling from the State Board of Equalization to get to the number that we need to be. So that's the first piece. If you're at 90%, probably good. You're probably not going to see any changes. The other part that can affect your estimate of value for budgeting purposes is if you have appeals. The equalization process is the informal process that property taxpayers can go to their boards that rule them and say that they have an unfair assessment for whatever reason. Provide documentation, say their points, listen to the assessor or the tax director, whoever is setting the values, defend their value, or say, yeah, I might have been a little greedy on that. I kind of agree. You know, we do that too. But that's the process where we can do some adjustments to values before taxes are levied. The appeal process isn't finalized, truthfully, until that October meeting that the state board finalizes the recommendations from the state tax department. So county tax directors would know if they have any appeals. For example, McKenzie County out in the county didn't have any appeals, but the city of Watford City had one apartment building appeal. So we know that there is one parcel that the value could change. Depending upon the magnitude of value of that parcel could affect the number that you guys need for assessments. Most of the time, if it's one or two parcels, not going to make a big difference. If it's one of my gas plants that's 248 million, it might make a big difference when you're talking about taxable valuation. I was talking about total, true, and full. But those are the things. So just be aware that when you're asking for this information from the tax directors, that there might be some factors that affect it. As tax directors, we're going to do our best to communicate with you if we know there might be some things that affect these numbers. If we have a tolerance issue that we didn't address and fix at county board, if we have a major appeal that might affect a certain school district, city, fire district, whatever, we're going to know that information and hopefully be able to communicate to the people that are requesting that information. It's really important that we keep those lines of communication open, and it's really important that you understand that until October, when the values are finalized, it's an estimate as close as we can. So the next piece of it, the complicated piece, new growth. Because new growth has its own separate consideration in HB 1176, I was just going to talk a little bit about where these new growth numbers come from and how we track them as tax directors. So there are different classifications of how we track the changes in property assessment in the tax system. So the first code that we call this our supplemental abstract. We report our supplemental abstract to the state. Assessors use information on this supplemental abstract a little bit differently than what auditors use. So I'll talk about it and then I'll kind of talk about the differences after this. First of all, when we're entering property value, we look at if the property has changed from taxable to non-taxable or vice versa. What does that mean? The city purchases a parcel of land because they need to build a new public works building. They purchased it from a private property owner. Prior to the city purchasing it, it was commercially taxed as a vacant lot. After the city has purchased it, it becomes exempt. We lose that value in the system. So that's a decrease. Or if, say, the city says, oh, we're going to sell the old city shop, that thing's obsolete, it would be money ahead if we sold it and built a new one. So they sell their exempt property to a private person that is taxable. That goes from being exempt to taxable. That's one example. We track that. Local assessment to central assessment, vice versa. Increase would be changing it to a central assessment, and it would be a decrease from the local assessment. And if it was a central assessment, and for whatever reason, I've never used this code, so I don't know, but for whatever reason, it went back to being locally assessed, again, we would track that. New construction or demolition. An increase is new construction. New houses, new buildings, any new structure would be new construction. That would be new growth. The decrease of that is demolition. Somebody's house burns down, there would be a decrease. We track that because we need it when we're equalizing the properties. Changes in classification is just we're taking it from ag land to commercial land, from commercial land to residential land, vice versa. That's not a new growth number. the land was previously taxed, you've already captured that value in your taxable value that you use as an auditor, but we need to track it for assessors because we have to pull it out of whatever cup we had it in and put it in the right cup. So we use that number, not new growth number. Exempt property change due to new construction or demolition. Again, not a code I've used, but I suppose if you came across a scenario where you would use it, maybe Al, have you ever used that code? No. There's some of these codes we don't use very often. They're not very common. Exempt property changed due to annexation. It wasn't taxed before, it's getting annexed. Say like you had like a city lagoon that was on like a county parcel, but it wasn't being taxed because everybody knew it was a city lagoon, and then you finally annexed it. Well, it's going to be a net zero because it was already exempt because it was being a lagoon, so it's not really a new growth number because you're not adding any value. Other, I suppose that would be some sort of weird scenario that you could use. Never used it, but again, not new growth. The ones in greens are the 3 new growth entries that we do. And the last one that we're going to talk about are TIF new construction. We all know TIFs are kind of their own animal, and the assessors need to track that information. So we thought about using a code that gave a nod to this CAT bill. So we put 76 because we figured it wouldn't get mixed up with anything, but that's how we're going to track it for our purposes. The truth is, and Linda Swyhovic helped me with this a little bit more, the new growth construction will not be included in the new growth that we report to you guys to use on your budget calculation worksheet until the TIF expires. And then when the TIF expires, the TIF incremental taxable value will be included as new growth on calculation 2, line 20, expired TIF incremental taxable value on the CAPS calculation worksheet. So basically, because of the TIF and the nature of it and the auditor tracking that information, that data from the TIF, you guys are going to be the one that has that number once the TIF expires. So it will not come from the tax director's office. We will just use it if there's a TIF in place and there's new construction and we need to capture it for our equalizing of market values for what we report to the state to remain in tolerance. So a little bit of extra information for that. So what we are going to report to you, our supplemental abstracts have all of this information, and this is super dry, and I apologize. But when you guys ask for new growth, we are going to report to you the increases for the exempt to taxable, the new construction, and any annexations. That's what we're going to report to you, and we would report it to you by district. So if the school calls and asks me for that, I will get that information from the school district parcels. The county, I provide all of the parcels and send that on. The city, same thing, it would just be specifically for their parcel. All of this information would be available after June. So again, new growth should be available by around June 30th or a little bit after. Depends upon how hairy it is to get all of your information reported to the state, and if you've had time to compile it down to the different taxing districts and the political subdivisions that need that information. The only other thing that might affect it a little bit is what we call omitted property. Some people call them escape assessments. It varies by city and county how you handle them. I know some counties hold hearings. As soon as they've figured out they've missed valuing something that was taxable, they'll send a notice out and hear it at the next commission meeting. In McKenzie County, we do it once. We do it in the first meeting in October, right before the state board finalizes their values. That's kind of the last push to get your tax rolls correct. And we do the hearing the beginning of October, and we would have a little bit of new growth because the only thing that you can do for omitted property is something that you weren't taxing. Like if you didn't pick up the house in time, but you knew it was there as of February 1st, we would add it in October if we didn't have the assessment complete. The value would be probably minimal and not have a major effect, and that's going to vary from county to county. And then when you're requesting information, just like I said before, most tax directors are going to be aware of the little things that might affect the number that we're giving you for the numbers that we can report to you. So we'll just try to do our best to communicate and keep you posted on what's happening and what can make an impact. Some of us might know June 30th that we don't have any appeals, we're in tolerance, we're good, and we might be able to report pretty confidently to you at that time. Any questions? I know that's super boring.
Katie, I just want to make sure I understand. So if we have a property, say it's been on a business exemption for 5 years, or it's been on a 10-year pilot. Same with the new home construction or the residential remodel. When those exemptions expire, we're going to count that as new growth.
Yes.
For the 3% cap, even if it's 10 years old.
I would say, because new growth would be going from non-taxable to taxable. So when it was part of an incentive program or an 10-year exemption, 5-year exemption, that sort of thing, it wasn't taxable at the moment, but then it's turning to be taxable. So I would probably call that a 1 for a change from non-taxable to taxable.
You didn't touch on this, but the primary and non-primary classification, who's responsible for determining if it's primary or non-primary, and when does that go into effect?
That might be more of a, I feel like it's going to fall on the counties the way I read the bill, but we don't have access to the other piece of that primary residence credit verification that the state does with the income tax and the motor vehicle database. So, Shelley, do you have any insight on that? You want to pop up here?
The answer is the County Director of Tax Equalization will need to notify every resident. This is through House Bill 1176. The Director of Tax Equalization will notify every resident of their approval or denial of primary residence credit classification. So you're going to get a list from the State Tax Department that tells you which parcels or applications were approved and which were not approved, and it will be the tax director's responsibility to notify each applicant. And that will go into effect
next year.
Yeah, it'll be for it'll be for tax year 26. So next year.
Just a question, and those of you that were in the room when they were hashing all of the details of this bill out might know better. Are they moving in a direction that property owners that have been approved for the primary residence credit don't have to apply?
I would say there was discussion, and at one point of the bill, there was a version that, or one of the bills, that eliminated the need for an application by identifying a primary residential classification category. There's just no way to do that because it changes all the time. But the way I read the law is once it's determined that it is a primary residential category or classification, it stays that way until the next tax year and the next application process. So I don't know that we were real clear on that during the debate of the bill, but it is pretty clear now that that's the role. So that might be a goal eventually, but it is also that the tax department doesn't have a way to change those classification codes within your tax system, so that was going to fall on the tax directors regardless as well.
I guess my question, that led on to another question. The reason being, like, if you don't have to continue applying, would the county then not, if you've been approved for the primary residence status of your parcel once and the application process goes away, do we have to continue notifying that the primary residence is on their parcel?
I hear your question, and that is not in the bill. If that were to happen, that might be the outcome, but that's not in the bill right now.
Okay. Any other questions? said, I know it's super dry. There's Al.
I think this is actually a comment to Sandy's question. How that works with exempt growth, it depends on how you count it on the front side.
Yep.
So I count a new construction and an exemption on the same parcel on the same, in the first year, so I don't have to count it when it comes off on the 5th year. You're allowed to do that. You can count the new house's growth, and then you can count a negative growth for the exemption. That's how we've been doing it in Burley County for 35 plus years. So we would count, that way when it comes off that exemption, we're not tracking, oh, now we got to add that value back onto that house, because we make the adjustments to the house for market separate from that exemption. Does that make sense?
Right. My one question would be, a lot of those new home buyer, new homeowner, new construction exemptions are up to $150,000, right? So you'd have a dollar amount. If it's just kind of interesting, like, is there a benefit or a detraction to do it either way?
I think now with caps, the benefit's to count it on the back, count it on the year it comes off. But before the cap, there was no benefit if your house was over 150,000. It didn't have any effect other than you didn't have to count it twice, basically.
Well, and I think a lot of this stuff, when you talk about new growth and supplemental, and why we even mention the TIFs as well, you don't want to be double dipping, because I think you got to be like very meticulous about how you're handling your new growth numbers, so that you're being accurate for our taxpayers.
Yes, I agree. That's correct. I just wanted, so you maybe, Sandy, were thinking years ago, a lot of people I think did them that way, where we counted it as new construction in year one, and we also took away the 75,000 or the 150,000 as a negative.
As
on the
being
same
like
abstract.
going from taxable to exempt.
Correct.
Okay. I can see the benefits of doing either. Do you remember how you did it? Any other? She nodded her head. She didn't answer. She remembered how she did it. So,
I guess when I was the tax director, and I believe Melissa's still doing it the same way, say if the house was valued at $300,000, we would put on $150,000 the first time it was occupied, and then 2 years after the exemption expires, we would add then the 150 for the exemption as coded as a 1, and then if it's worth more, anything above that would be a reassessment.
which is just market change.
Yes.
Yes.
And okay.
And that makes sense to me, because you're not taxing it, and then you don't have that decrease line. But
Katie,
I see how the numbers work the way that Al was explaining it too. And the assessors are going to talk a lot more about this in August when we have our annual meeting in lieu of the State Board of Equalization. So some of the devil in the details stuff as far as assessors go will be, even though we've already reported for this year, we're just talking about making sure that everybody has a great understanding of this so that we are providing the best information we can to the auditors and other budgeting entities that rely on our information. Good?
All right, let's give Katie a round of applause.